Hey guys, ChrisFix here, and today I'm going to show you how to complete your abandoned project car, and this is not how I wanted to start off this video, but here's what happened to my project car. First off, this is my first real hurricane that I've ever experienced, and this car has seen better days. Just look at all this water. Now, sometimes stuff like this is what you need to get motivated, to restart that project that's been sitting, and although this doesn't look good, it kind of is. So right here, right now, is the fresh, new, moist restart of the $300 Turbo Del Sol project, and for those of you who don't know, here's how this all started. So like any car guy, I was looking for used cars online. I use Auto Tempest, which allows you to search tons of car for sale websites all at once, and I wanted to find a car with a bad head gasket so I could make a video on how to replace piston return springs. And it just so happened that one of my favorite cars as a kid popped up, a Honda Del Sol, and he was asking $1,000, which was perfect. So I went and checked out the car to hopefully buy it, and seeing this car for the first time, it got me super excited because this is the car I loved as a kid. I really liked how unique it was, but as you can see, this specific car was far from being in good shape. The rattle can paint job, the steel wheels, dry rotted tires, and just tons of small broken parts everywhere. Luckily, the owner was very friendly, and looking back, he was actually very honest about everything, which is rare these days.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, how's it going?
My name's Jensen, man. Nice finally
to meet
you. Yeah, same. All right, so here I got, my 93 Del Sol. To be completely honest with you, it does have a blown head gasket at the moment. Control arm's a little squeaky here and there, so it will need replacing. The paint is good for now. Paint job in the future would be good. And for, to my knowledge, that's really about it.
Next, Jensen gave me a quick tour of the car. He showed me how to easily remove the roof and store it in the trunk, and then roll down the rear window, which is how this car got its name, Del Sol. That means of the sun in Spanish. After that, I went for a quick mandatory test drive, even with the head gasket leak. And right away, I learned that the shifter is really worn out. I wasn't even sure if it was in first, and as I drove, I noticed the car felt very loose and the suspension was clunking and banging on every bump. But the car did drive, and I was able to shift it into multiple gears, so I had a basic idea of what's wrong with this car. So this car was far from being worth $1,000, and it's really rough. And Jensen told me that a lot of people came to see the car, but they weren't serious. They offered to take it off his hands, or they offered him $100. So here's the offer I made him. What I'd like to offer you, what I think the car is worth, is $300, and I got the trailer. Trailer is ready to go on the back of my truck. I'll take it today, $300 cash.
And for the $300, I'll take it, man.
Yeah? Awesome. You got yourself a deal.
All right, sounds good, man.
And just like that, I bought myself a piece of junk that needs a lot of work, but it's the perfect budget project car. And I remember the whole ride home, I was thinking about all the fixes and the mods I was going to do to this car, and I was super excited to get started. So after trailering it home, I immediately set off to replace the head gasket because that was the most serious problem. So I removed the bolts from the exhaust manifold, then I unbolted the intake manifold and moved it off the head. Then I carefully removed the timing belt from the sprocket, and finally I unscrewed the head bolts, working my way from the outside inwards so I don't warp the head. And with the head bolts removed, now the head could be removed. Next, I cleaned up the block and head surface so the new head gasket could go right on like that, and then the head could be placed over the block. And here's the old head gasket. You can see where the gasket failed, and it allowed the coolant to pour into the engine. So with the new head gasket in, I torqued down all the head bolts from the center outwards, that way the head seats evenly and won't warp. Then I put the timing belt back in place, I tightened down the intake back into the head, and torqued down the exhaust manifold in a crisscross pattern. And finally, I reinstalled the old crusty valve cover. Now before we could start the car, we had to drain the old oil and change the filter, and just look at how bad that oil is. It looks like a thick chocolate milk because of that head gasket leak. So with some fresh new oil in the engine, another thing I needed to do is add some coolant because the bad head gasket turned most of the coolant into smoke. And so you guys know, this was my first ever head gasket job, so I was a little nervous for the next part, starting up the car. And here we go, moment of truth. All right, that is awesome. So now the head gasket was fixed, but you always want to expect to uncover other problems that you didn't know about when you buy a project car. For example, this giant rust hole. And this was another fix that I've never done before, but luckily it wasn't difficult. First, you need to cut out all the rust, then get a piece of sheet metal and cut it to shape to fill the hole, and now you can weld the sheet metal into the car. Just be sure to spread the heat out by welding different spots, that way you don't overheat the metal and warp it. And finally, I coated the entire top and underside of the floorboard with a special paint to prevent rust, and it came out looking amazing. So with the giant rust hole fixed, I needed to paint the valve cover to make it look nicer. So first I hit the cover with a paint stripper and worked it in with a metal wire brush, and finally I rinsed it off and cleaned it with a paper towel and alcohol. And I wanted to make this paint job a little bit unique, so I added my logo to the valve cover, and I hit it with the first coat of paint. This is a silver metallic foundation layer that's going to make the next layer really pop. Then I hit it with this blue paint, making sure to have a nice even coat around the whole valve cover. And then once that dried, I peeled away the vinyl stickers, leaving behind the bare aluminum look. Then I showed you guys a real quick way to make the Honda logo and the lettering silver again by using a file. And then the final step was to add some high temperature clear coat to protect all this hard work. After the cover dried, it was time to install, and check out this before and after. Much better. Right after that, I wanted to install a kill switch because my friend who just bought a Honda himself had it stolen right out of his driveway. He found it gutted and abandoned on the side of the road, and it was heartbreaking. So to prevent this, I showed you guys a few sneaky spots to hide a kill switch, and I personally ended up putting it in my shifter bezel. So I drilled a hole where I wanted to mount the switch, then I added that switch and tightened it down to hold it in place. Then I reinstalled the interior piece with the switch installed and showed you how to find the wiring that goes to your fuel pump, because without fuel, the car won't start. So once I showed you how to find the correct wire, I cut that wire and I wired the switch into the circuit. That way you could turn the power off going to the fuel pump. Moment of truth, we're in neutral. I think the switch is deactivated, so it should be ready to start up. All right, it starts right up. Now I'm gonna shut the car. I'm gonna flip our kill switch and I'm gonna start her back up. Woo, baby! And a criminal's gonna be like, what the heck? Why won't it start? Flip that kill switch. Starts right up. Oh man, that is exciting. Now after the kill switch, the next big project to make the car more drivable was to rebuild and replace the entire front suspension, because the car was not really that safe to drive. And just to give you an idea, look at how worn these bushings are. You can see with just a little bit of pressure, the control arm bushings give way. And this is why the steering is so vague and there's a clunking noise going over bumps. I mean, this is the original suspension from 1993. So to fix this, the first thing I did was remove the axle nut. So I hammered out the indented part. That way I could loosen up the nut completely so it comes off all the way. Next, I removed the brake caliper as well as the rotor, and that was rust welded to the hub, so it needed a little bit of persuasion to come off. Then I removed the upper control arm from the top of the knuckle, and I kept the nut on there as I hammered, and that'll prevent the stud from mushrooming. That way it comes right out. With that removed, we had to remove the lower control arm from the knuckle. This had a rusty cotter pin, so I pulled it out with some pliers and then removed the nut completely. And I wanted to show you guys another method of popping the stud out of the knuckle. So I used a ball joint removal tool, and you just tighten it until the stud pops loose. And now you can see the knuckle comes right out. Finally, the last thing holding this knuckle in was a tie rod. So I loosened that up and then hammered the stud upwards to break it free. And just like that, the tie rod could come off, and now the knuckle could be removed. Then I removed the tie rod from the steering rack, followed by removing the worn out strut, as well as the clunky axle. And finally, I unbolted the lower control arm so it could be removed. So out with all the old suspension parts and in with the new ones. So next I had to rebuild the knuckle, and I started by hammering out the old hub, like so, then hammering out the old bearing, and finally hammering out the old ball joint, like so. Next, I painted the knuckle and strut fork, that way they look brand new. And I also painted the underside of the wheel well, so not only does this look good, but it's gonna stay rust-free for years to come. After everything dried, I added the new parts to the knuckles, starting with the ball joint. You just use the cup and ball joint press and then tighten down the press until the ball joint bottoms out like so. Then you add your snap ring to the other side to hold it in place. Next, I installed a new wheel bearing, and this gets pressed in a similar fashion to the ball joint. And once it bottoms out, you put the snap ring to hold it in place. Then we could add the hub and press it into the bearing like so, and now the knuckle is fully rebuilt. So back at the car, I installed a new tie rod, as well as the new upper control arm, and torqued that to spec. Then the new strut went in and got torqued to spec, followed by the new axle, which you need to make sure it gets pushed all the way into the transmission. And then with the axle in, the lower control arm could be installed, and I torqued that to spec as well. And finally, the knuckle could be installed, making sure the axle splines line up, and then just give it a push, and then you could put the ball joint into the lower control arm. Good. Now with the knuckle in place, let's come over to the tie rod and get that installed. So slide the tie rod end into the knuckle, hand tighten the nut, and torque it to spec. Then we need to slide in our cotter pin and bend both ends of the cotter pin around the nut. That way the nut can't come loose. Same thing with the lower ball joint. I got that nut on there, torqued it to spec, and added the cotter pin. After that was installed, the last thing to do was to tighten down the upper ball joint. So I pushed the stud through the knuckle and torqued it down. Alright, so all that was left to do was add the new brake rotor, install the refreshed brake caliper, torque it to spec, and then install the brake pads. Now, I couldn't just reuse the old dry-rotted tires and the steel wheels, which look horrible. So I got some new tires and I put them on some new wheels I got for a great price. So finally, with the wheels bolted on, I set the car on the ground to finish the last step, install the axle nut. So I used some medium-strength thread locker and hand tightened the nut onto the axle and then torqued it to spec. Then you need to stake the nut into place with a punch so it won't loosen. And to finish this all up, the last thing to do is to take the car to the alignment shop because you could see it was all out of spec. Now, a few minutes later, everything was adjusted and the front suspension rebuild was complete. So there was still a lot to do on this Del Sol project, but it was coming along nicely. And this is when I introduced to you guys my idea of turboing the Del Sol with a budget-friendly eBay turbo kit. But then, unfortunately, there was a lot going on in my life at that time, and I had to put the Del Sol into storage for what I thought was only going to be a couple of weeks. But little did I know, life wasn't going to get much easier for me. Okay, so now you know the Project Turbo Del Sol origin story, and I'm tired of coming up with excuses of why this car isn't running and driving, and why I haven't made a how to turbo your car video yet. So today we're gonna get this car running and driving, and take her to the track for a quarter-mile time, get a 0 to 60 time, and put her on the dyno to see how much horsepower and torque she's making before we add the turbo. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get this car dry before the interior gets all moldy. This is definitely not good. So if you ever get into a small flood like this, here's what you need to do. First, grab your wet dry shop vac and suck out all the water from the carpet. You really should remove the carpets completely and set it out to dry, but it's 90 degrees out, so once most of the water is removed, I'm gonna leave the doors open and let it sit in the sun for a day. So a day later, even though I removed all the water from the carpet, it's pretty dry, it still smells musty in here. I'm guessing there's mold or bacteria or something that's making the back of my throat burn when I sit in the car, which isn't good. Now, eventually we'll clean everything out. We'll take the carpets out. I'll show you how to do all that. We'll install new carpets, new seats, stuff like that. But for now, I just want to be able to drive the car, so I have this odor eliminator, and this kills the mold and the bacteria and the stuff that causes the odors. And it's super easy to use. Let me show you. First, we need to close all the windows in the car so the gas gets trapped in the interior. Now, inside of this, we have two pieces, the sponge and the packet. First, you need to saturate the sponge with some water, like so. Then we can open up this packet, and you definitely want to do this outside wearing gloves. And finally, slide the end of the packet into the slit in the sponge, just like this, and place this in the plastic container that it comes in with the vent holes up. Then you want to place this in the middle of the interior on a flat surface, and this doesn't mask smells. It releases a chlorine gas that kills the odors completely. So don't breathe this in, and we're gonna let this sit overnight. Now, I use these odor eliminators in every car I buy. Here's a great video that I took with my other car, and it gives you an idea of how it works. You can see the chlorine dioxide being released into the car so it fills the interior and destroys the odors as well as the bacteria and mold that create them. The next morning, you want to open up all the doors in the car to vent the interior out. And then after it vents out for a few minutes, let's remove this and throw it out. And then before you sit in here, just let it vent for a few more minutes so you're not breathing anything bad in. So with the interior of the car all aired out so it's safe to be in here, I wish you guys could smell what it smells like. It smells sterile. I don't even know how to explain it. It smells like nothing. There are no odors. It doesn't smell musty anymore. And the back of my throat isn't burning, which is a good thing. That means we could go for a ride. Now, before we go for a ride, here's the next problem that we need to fix. Listen to this. You're gonna know what it is. So the battery is dead. Now, I have tried to charge it once and it won't hold a charge, so I'm pretty sure it's bad. So let me show you how to test it to know for sure, because batteries aren't cheap. So grab a battery load tester, put the alligator clips on the terminals, and this battery is 410 cold cranking amps. Good. Now we can let it do its thing. Okay, and there you go. It's saying the battery's bad with just 262 cold cranking amps, so we need to replace it. So let's unscrew the nuts holding the battery tie down in and remove that. Then unscrew the nut on the positive terminal and unscrew the nut on the negative terminal. And you always want to remove negative first, then the positive, and now we can remove the battery. And this thing is pretty heavy. So out with the old and in with the new. And the new battery is a lithium battery. There's a couple of benefits, one being weight savings. Check this out. So let's get the lead acid battery on the scale. And this weighs 25 pounds and 9 ounces. Okay, so now let's weigh the new lithium battery, and this weighs 10 pounds, 15 ounces. So that's just under 15 pounds of weight saved, which for such a small battery is pretty impressive. Also, for such a light car, every pound counts. Now, the main reason I got this battery is because of this feature right here. This is my favorite thing about this, and that is a jump start feature. So if you run your battery completely down, you leave your headlights on or something like that, this stores up enough energy where when you press that, it allows you to start your car. So that is huge. That way you won't get stranded, plus all the extra electrical stuff I'm gonna be running on this car between gauges, the upgraded ECU, all that stuff for the turbo. I wanna make sure I have a good power source. And that's why I picked out this battery, so let's get it installed. Another benefit with the lightweight battery is it's super easy to install because it's so light. So let's get the tie down in place and tighten down both the nuts to hold it in, and that's not going anywhere. Now don't forget to remove the terminal covers. Then you want to connect the positive terminal first and tighten it down so it's snug, and then finish by connecting the negative terminal and snug that up as well. All right, let's go test out this battery. Moment of truth. Well, the battery cranks over that engine extra fast. That is a very strong battery. But I do not hear that fuel pump priming. This has been an issue since the day I got the car, and that's why I leave a hammer right next to the fuel pump. Let me show you. So I use this to hit the top of the fuel pump to shake it up. Then I cycle the key. Hear that? The fuel pump's working. So there you go, the fuel pump is obviously bad. Now I'm pretty confident this is the original fuel pump, and as you can see from all the surface debris here, all the rust, this fuel pump has seen better days. I'm kind of afraid to see what it looks like inside there. Looks like this one's been epoxied because of a leak or something. So let's replace this fuel pump with a nice brand new fuel pump assembly, and it has a brand new fuel pump and fuel sock, which is like a pre-filter. So let's go swap it out. We don't want any of this rust getting into the fuel tank, so let's vacuum around the opening here. Now let's disconnect this electrical connector and set it off to the side. Next, let's remove the fuel return hose, so move the hose clamp down off the end here and out of the way. And this is a hose grip pliers I'm using to help me remove this fuel line, and the trick is always to twist the hose back and forth to break it free, since this has probably never been removed since 1993. Now we can remove the high pressure fuel line by unscrewing the banjo bolt, and then set that off to the side. And finally, there's 6 nuts holding in the fuel pump assembly, so let's unscrew all those, and now the fuel pump is free, and it could come right out. So out with the old, and in with the new. You gotta be kidding me. Actually, hold up. This is why you always compare parts, because unless I'm missing something here, these two are definitely not the same. Now, since the goal here is to get this car back on the road, we have hit a roadblock. We do not want to delay this any further, because that's just an excuse for, oh, well, I'll let this car sit even longer. We want to get it back on the road now. So no more delays. This, unfortunately, is a very specific pump for the Honda Del Sol. I don't think they make new ones at all. I did a quick search and I couldn't find any. I reached out to some Honda friends of mine and they told me basically junkyard ones. So I'm gonna look for a good junkyard one, but in the meantime, that's gonna take a little while. So I'm gonna take this pump right here, I'm gonna retrofit it into my current fuel pump assembly, and I'm gonna make sure it works. That way, we could get this car back on the road. So first remove the pump from the assembly. Oh, the fuel sock came off, but that's okay. Now let's pull this off the hose, good. And finally disconnect the wiring harness, and there we go. And this fuel pump looks the same as the original one. So now we want to remove the original fuel pump the same exact way. So disconnect the wiring harness, then we can pull it off the hose, and finally let's remove the fuel sock because this specifically fits the Del Sol. So let's get that old fuel sock on the new pump, and it's a press fit, so just make sure you push it on there good. Perfect. Then we can push the electrical connector back in. Then we can push the fuel pump onto the hose and move that hose clamp to the end so it doesn't come off. Then we can push the pump back into the assembly and we're good to go and reinstall this into the tank. Now before we install the new pump, let's remove the old fuel that's been in here for 5 years, because even though I added fuel stabilizer, gasoline degrades after 5 years and we want good fuel for our drag strip and dyno runs. There's only about a half a tank in here anyway, and this tank isn't very big. So once the tank is empty, let's install the rebuilt fuel pump assembly, making sure this is clocked in the correct direction. Next, tighten down all 6 nuts in a crisscross pattern so the assembly mates to the top of the fuel tank evenly. That way there aren't any leaks. Next, we need to tighten down the banjo bolt, but it's important that you don't reuse these old washers, and instead make sure you use brand new ones. One goes on the bottom, then the fuel line goes on, and then the other washer goes on top, and you could hand tighten the bolt until it's snug. Now let's get the fuel return line in place. Then we can move the hose clamp to the end like so, and then reconnect the wiring harness so it clicks. Good. And finally, this banjo bolt gets torqued to 22 foot-pounds so it won't leak fuel. Now let's add some fresh fuel so we can make it to the gas station. And I'm using the ChrisFix funnel, made in the USA. And I'm only adding a gallon because the gas station's right around the corner. Good, and that should do it, so let's get the gas cap back on. And the dirtiness of this fuel filler area is bothering me. So grab some soapy water and spray it down. Then we're gonna agitate all the dirt with a brush. And finally, rinse all the dirt away. Much better. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see if she'll start. But first, let's just see if the fuel pump will prime. Beautiful, I hear that fuel pump, and here we go. All right, now the first thing we need to do real quick is check the fuel pump area to make sure there's no leaks. And as you can see, there's nothing leaking here. We're nice and dry, so we're good to go. Okay, so she's been idling for a few minutes now and she's running great. The only thing left to do is head out and get some fuel because we are on E. Then we could head to the track, run our quarter mile, and then go to the dyno and see how much power she's making. So let's go to the gas station. All right, so I'm beginning to think this car is cursed. For whatever reason, the rear brakes are jammed up and not spinning. Even pulling it with my truck isn't working to free it up, so we're gonna have to take the wheels off and investigate. So let's slide the jack under the car, right under the cross member, and jack her up so the wheels are off the ground. Can't forget about the jack stands. Good, and then we could slowly let the car down on the jack stands. Now we could break all 4 lug nuts loose, then remove them the rest of the way by hand and take the wheel off. And I always like to slide the wheel under the car for extra protection. And let's see here. Yeah, just as I figured. Let's hit this with a hammer. Okay, now that's much better. Now it actually spins, so let's remove the drum and take a look at the damage. Oh yeah, and as you can see, this is all super rusty. I bet the flood water seized up the drums from all the rust. But don't worry, we're gonna convert this to disc brakes anyway. But sheesh, look at this. That's a lot of rust. So now let's get the unseized drum back on, along with the wheel, and then hand tighten the lug nuts for now, and we'll torque that later. Now on the other side, we wanna get the drum unstuck as well. There we go. Sheesh, okay, so both of these drums are really rusty, so these are gonna have to get replaced. But for now, we're good to go. So let's get that drum back on and get the wheel back on. Then hand tighten the lug nuts, that way we could torque them down. Now we need to jack the car up just a little bit so we can remove the jack stands and lower the car to the ground so the tires just touch the ground. Now let's torque the lug nuts to spec in a crisscross pattern for both wheels. And once both wheels are torqued, lower the car to the ground the rest of the way and let's go for a ride. First stop, the gas station, because we are running on fumes. All right, so let's go get some fresh fuel in the Del Sol, and I'm gonna be using Shell's V-Power Nitro Plus, which has additives in it that cleans the fuel injectors up to 100%. It's also 93 octane, which will be very helpful once we boost the Del Sol. Now, so you have an actual idea of what dirty injectors look like compared to clean injectors, here's 4 fuel injectors from another one of my cars, and you can see the second injector is dirty and the spray pattern is not good. Same thing with the third injector, although it's not as dirty. But both of these would cause a loss in fuel economy, so it's important that your injectors are clean like these 2 outside ones, which are working perfectly. So hopefully that visual helped. Now let's go fill her up. Now, if you ever wondered what it looks like when you're fueling up your car from the inside of the gas tank, wonder no more. Here's something you don't get to see every day. And just like that, we are filled up with some fresh fuel. I do want to thank Shell very much for supporting the video and supporting the budget build. I cannot wait to see what she does on the quarter mile and what kind of horsepower she puts down on the dyno. So let's go head to the track. Oh man, I've missed this so much. If you have a project car, it's on jack stands or in storage or not driving, get it driving. Trust me, this feels so good to be back on the road. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't make your car perfect, just get it on the road. I got a cracked windshield, I got a check engine light on. I got a shifter that's loosey-goosey. I'm pretty sure the exhaust, the muffler, whatever, fell off. Either that or it has a hole in it because it's so loud. Listen to this. But you get the idea. The car is running and driving and it feels amazing. I missed this. So let's get to the track and let's see what we can do for the quarter mile. All right, so we made it to the drag strip and I'm here with my buddy Cletus McFarland. You ready to let her rip?
Yeah, let's see what it'll run down the drag strip, then we'll take it over to our dyno.
Okay, so I've only done a quarter mile one other time before and that was years ago. But Cletus gave me some tips, so let's see what I could do. So we ran an 18.4 second quarter mile at 76 miles an hour, and the 0 to 60 time was 11.22 seconds, which, just to give you an idea, is slower than my Prius. Now before we head to the dyno, Cletus wanted to give her a rip, and I'm curious to see how much faster he's gonna be with all his drag racing experience.
It's a tight squeeze. You ready?
for anybody who's into drag racing, here are the time slips. You could see I am just about a half a second behind Cletus. That's not bad for my second time drag racing. So we have a good baseline for our quarter mile times. Now let's head to the dyno. So a dyno is like a giant treadmill for cars, and since the Del Sol is front wheel drive, we need to put the front wheels on the dyno.
All right, so what do you think we're gonna run?
93 Honda Del Sol, powerhouse. I'm going 93 horsepower.
All right, what's the least horsepower you've had on this dyno?
93 Honda Del Sol.
Baby, so here are the results. The dotted line is the torque and the solid line is the horsepower. So max torque happens around 4,700 RPMs at 89 pound-feet. And then max power is made at around 6,000 RPMs at 92 horsepower. And I'm very curious because look at how the power falls off real hard at 6,500 RPMs. I wonder what's happening there.
Almost made 100 horsepower.
It's up there with the record.
All right, well, I appreciate it. After turbo, we'll see how she does.
Yeah,
Bring her
maybe
back.
double the power.
We're interested to see what you do.
All right, thank you guys.
Yes, sir.
All right, so the Project Del Sol is back. She's alive, she's kicking, and it feels so good to be able to drive her again. She's not in storage, she's not on jack stands. If this isn't motivation for you guys to get your project car back on the road, I don't know what is. So now we have our pre-turbo 0 to 60, quarter mile, and dyno numbers. And you guys know what that means. It is time to install a turbo kit. And not just any turbo kit. This is the classic $600 eBay turbo kit. It is very budget friendly, and we're gonna try to make some reliable power using this kit. Just as a quick overview, you have your couplers and tubing for the intercooler. You obviously have your turbo. You have all the oil lines that need to go to the oil pan to feed the turbo and also drain the turbo. You have your wastegate, you have your blow-off valve, you have your exhaust components, and your intercooler. And that's pretty much what comes with the kit, but that's not all you need. You're gonna need more as usual. So we have our cooler spark plugs, and we're gonna need to upgrade the fuel system. Something simple like just replacing your original fuel filter is important. Getting a higher flow fuel pump, getting better injectors, and of course, upgrading the ECU so you could tune it. And then you're gonna have to do some other stuff like add some gauges. It's important to know boost, air-fuel ratios, fuel pressure, oil pressure, stuff like that. So there is a lot that goes into it, and I'm gonna show you everything you need to know in a complete series on how to get your car ready to turbo, and then how to turbo your car. But wait, there's more. Remember how the exhaust is all messed up? The muffler's kind of just hanging there underneath the car. It sounds really loud. Well, we're gonna fix that with a brand new exhaust system. So I'm gonna show you how to install this. And Hondas don't really usually sound that great with a full exhaust. It's just kind of how it is. But this is a valved exhaust. So when you want the extra power, you want it to be loud, you open up the valve, it goes straight through, and it's loud. When you want it to be quiet for your neighbors or just for cruising around town or whatever it is, you close the valve and it's nice and quiet, and this kit comes with everything you need to install it. So that is gonna be awesome. Another very important fix I'm gonna show you how to do is fix your wet noodle of a shifter. So that's first right there, but it looks like neutral. Look at how loose that is. I think that's third? No, that's first, that's third. I can't even tell. That's how bad this shifter is. It's so vague, it's not crisp, and it's just not good. And the reason why is this right here. You could see how rusted everything is underneath. All the bushings are bad, and there's just so much play in this shifter. That's not good. So to fix that, I got this rust-free shifter linkage from the junkyard. You can see that looks way better than what we have, but it does have the rubber bushings on both ends, which are shot. So we're gonna be installing polyurethane bushings, which are stiffer. That way we have a more crisp shift, and they won't move as much as the rubber does. Plus, we're gonna install a short throw shifter. Again, more direct, more crisp shifts, so it's gonna feel amazing. And finally, you guys remember how bad those drum brakes were in the rear. They were super rusty, and also they seized up on us. But I'm not worried because we're gonna be doing a drum to disc conversion using these adapter plates and then using brake hardware and brake parts from different vehicles that are already on the road. And I think you get the idea. As with any project, there's always something to do. We got the front bumper to install here. There's fenders that I need to put on. We're gonna end up getting paint work done to this car when it's all said and done. There's a bunch of parts I wanna install. We have a nice carbon fiber steering wheel going in, brand new carpets and seats. We gotta rebuild the entire rear suspension just like we did the front suspension. We got a rear bumper going on and a nice spoiler that'll go on. And I mean, there's much more. I can't wait to show you guys everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button for updates about this build. And as always, all the tools and products I used in this video are linked down in the description so you can easily find them.